Welcome on this wonderful Friday morning to another coffee break. This week we're going to talk about portrait photography. I'm going to go between my presentation and some examples in Photoshop in terms of just some photos that we can use when I go through each of the themes. Just a bit of a background on this photo. One of my friends actually was in the photography program at Humber, and the overall goal or the assignment was to create a photo using flash and natural light. The natural light here is the lamp. The flash is lighting my side of my face. Yes, this is me with a beard. Don't laugh. This was about 3 years ago. There's a lot to portrait photography, and we'll go through some of the basics, I think, and we'll hopefully help you take better portraits and think about your portraits a bit differently. I'll first talk about the UHN 24 project. I'll tease that a little bit, as there's not a whole lot I'll be able to share, but I think it's really interesting, something you guys might want to keep a lookout in the future. We'll go into about planning your portrait, looking at location, composition, lighting, and outfits, some tips on posing, interacting with your subject, and that's very key. The different types of portraits, just a few words about that, and then I'll leave you with some inspiration rather than a photo assignment, as I have been with some of my presentations. Some inspiration from different portrait photographers that you can guys look at afterwards in some of their work. So the UHN 24 project is basically UHN over the course of 24 hours. Some of the roles in the hospital, in research, that go on around the clock, not the regular, your clinics, your surgeries, that kind of stuff, but stuff behind the scenes. What does the laundry look like at TWH and TGH, or what does the people that clean the surgical tools do? So it's really important because these portraits tell stories of the people that are working around the clock to make our institution run as flawlessly as possible. And not everybody gets to see that side. I had the privilege of working an overnight or photographing overnight between the Western and the General, where I got to see some really cool stuff. And, the public affairs team is really excited. Dan Gerard actually has been spearheading the whole project along with a few of my other colleagues in public affairs. And it takes you behind the scenes, and you get to see these people in their work environments and how they interact with their workspace, and really sheds light on, Team UHN as a whole. It puts that emphasis on Team UHN and the individuals that make up our team. So that's the 24-hour project. It got delayed, of course, because of the pandemic, and we're not sure of our current timelines with, everything else that we have to plan for with, getting back to work and that sort of stuff. So, but I just wanted to highlight the importance of portraiture in healthcare, and you'll see this project hopefully this year when we do release it from the Public Affairs Department. So before you want to take your photo or your portrait, consider planning it. Put some thought into what you want to do or what you want to achieve and what you want to photograph. So ask yourself some basic questions. Who are you photographing? What is who is that person? What's their story? What are they all about? What do they do? What do they research? What are you photographing? Is it, are you photographing a headshot? Is it maybe for an award? Do you want something that's a little more photojournalistic in nature for a new discovery, for a news release? Where are you going to be photographing? Location is key, because you'll see throughout this presentation how location does play a role in telling that story and what you want to say about that person in a specific location, right? I'll get more in detail about location later on in a later slide. And how you want to take your portrait. What type of equipment are you using? Are you going to use your smartphone, which is absolutely fine. Portrait mode works wonderfully in most cases, and I think it's actually a great feature. And initially, it was very gimmicky, and when the iPhone released it, and some of the other cell phone camera companies released it, but you can use your cell phone to take great portraits. Are you going to use a DSLR or a bit more professional camera? What is going to be your settings and things like that? And I could have a whole presentation on camera settings about portraits and lighting and all that sort of stuff. But the one thing I want to do with this presentation, I don't want to focus on camera equipment and settings, because I want you guys to develop a vision and practice with your creative eye, because that is going to tell your story better than shooting on a 24 millimeter lens versus an 85 millimeter lens. While that stuff's good to know, it's not the sort of meat and potatoes of how you're going to tell your story. Your creative vision and your creative eye is going to do that. So let's get into a few things to consider here. Consider location, right? Who is the person and how do they fit into that location? Within that location, you're going to have your subject against a background. You might have some foreground elements. And how does that location add to the story that you want to tell about that person? In this photo here, this is Dr. Valiente. He's a neurosurgeon at the Western, specializes in epilepsy research. And I had the privilege of being able to go into the OR and photograph one of the surgeries. Of course, completely consented. And this is his environment, right? This is his domain. This contributes to who he is as a person and the story I want to tell about Taufik, right? You know, he's, you know, in PPE, in scrubs, as you would be in the OR. He's got his surgical glasses on. And if you see in the bottom left of this glass frame, you can see what he's operating on a little bit. And it's one of my favorite photos that I've taken at Krembil so far. And it really tells you who Taufik is. You know, of course, you can't see his face completely clear because, you know, he's in mid-surgery, but I think it's interesting to see how he gets placed in this setting. I'll also go through some other location related photos as well. So in Photoshop here, you can see this is Dr. Chandran, right? He is a clinician scientist with the arthritis program. And this environment, this location, is who he is, right? You've got everything here related to arthritis on the board. You've got him with a chart here, right? Because he's a doctor, he's a clinician, so he's probably looking at patient files, although this is faked and you can't identify who the patient is. You've got a little skeleton here because he deals with diseases of the bone and joint, right? So this whole environment tells the story of who Dr. Chandran is, right? He is a clinician scientist in the arthritis department, and that's who he is. In this second example here is Dr. Melanie Cohn. The background here doesn't really play a big role in the story because it's very clean. It doesn't distract you from the portrait, right? You have some leading lines here, but they're out of focus and, you know, they're not distracting, and it really draws you into her face, which is the main focus. Something like this is probably best suited for a LinkedIn headshot, maybe for the department or institute website, or maybe if you want to send it out for, you know, award recognition through social media channels, you know, whether your institution tweets it out or anything like that. So you can sort of see the differences between the two versus, you know, Dr. Chandran's portrait versus Dr. Melanie's portrait. And here's an example of something that's completely unrelated. Like this environment, I'm sitting here with a cow in the middle of finance district. And, you know, financial district, you think of people in suits, professionals going to work in this type of industry. I'm in jeans, in sneakers, a hat, and with my sort of unkempt beard as well, right? So this environment sort of it's a mismatch. It's a mismatch with my outfit, with what I'm doing. And there was really no intention or thought behind this portrait. So you can kind of see how this does not, you know, this environment doesn't play to who I am as a person and what I'm doing in this environment. I just honestly thought this cow was really cool. So that's why I decided to take a photo. So you can kind of see the differences in the types of environments that can play a role in taking a good portrait. And you should consider that location or the location you want to shoot in and how that plays to the subject. So next, we'll talk about composition. Composition is a huge thing when it comes to portraiture because it basically tells you where your audience or your viewer's eyes will go in that frame. And you want to be intentional with it because you want to draw attention to, you know, obviously your subject here. This is Dr. Gelra Zadeh, and she's part of the Krembil Brain Institute, also cross-appointed with Princess Margaret. And I think she was just appointed head of surgery at UHN. So in this photo, really, Gelra is, you know, the main focus, and the way that it's composed is to highlight that, right? And we'll go over some different compositions as well, and I'll showcase that as well here. So if we look at this composition. It's sort of a three-quarter shot, you know. You've got basically from the waist up here, and he's sort of framed off like this. You know, his face is still in focus, Dr. Devennier. He's part of our vision group at Krembil. And he's framed here with these lines, right? You can see how I've used these lines here to frame Dr. Devennier's face, and it draws attention into that. It's not a tight headshot. It's sort of a medium look, but the composition plays a role into how your eyes are guided to Dr. Devennier's face. And that's the goal with a portrait. You want to showcase the person, their face. You don't want other distracting elements. So I've used, you know, what could have been potentially a distracting background with these lines to frame Dr. Devennier's face. This one's sort of a tighter headshot. This is Dr. Rosen. And similar to the Melanie Cohn shot that you saw earlier, the background's kind of melted away and the entire focus is on her face, right? So there's no distracting elements. You know where your eyes go to directly. It's her face, her eyes, and her expression, right? So you can see, this is sort of a medium close-up headshot. And there's no distraction, and you know that's the person that you're photographing, and that's who you want your audience to see and connect with. Another rule about composition, this is a very tight close-up. I consider this a portrait even though you can't see Dr. Hodai's face, simply because you see her sort of in her element and performing surgery. But another composition element, this is sort of a subframe. If you were here for the first photography presentation I gave, I talked about subframing as part of composition, right? And you can do that with certain elements. So this resident or doctor he's out of focus, so it's not distracting, but he's placed here, and on this side, there's some out of focus surgical tools that you can see here that aren't distracting, and they sort of frame between the two. They frame Dr. Hodai's face, and she's looking down performing her operation, right? So the entire focus is still on Dr. Hodai on this portrait, but I've used elements within the frame to basically isolate her in this position as well. So those are some compositional ideas that you could take, and definitely refer to that first presentation as well that I gave about smartphone photography, because there's some other compositional techniques that you can sort of employ in portraits as well, depending on the type of portrait you're taking. So the next thing I want to talk about is lighting. Without photography, there is no light. And I think the best tip I ever received, or the best advice I ever received as a young photographer when I first started out, was study light. If you study light, you understand how shadows and highlights, so the dark and light areas of an image, play a role in shaping the face and play a role in telling a story as well, depending on the color of the light, the temperature of the light, whether it's, you know, cool tones or warm tones, and the shape of the light as well, how it falls on your subject. I'm going to talk about two types of light, you know, natural light and some of its variations, and flash. And I absolutely love flash. I've actually just incorporated, maybe in the last year and a half, a little more flash and getting creative with it. Primarily because when I photograph at Krembil indoors, it's not very well lit. So I have to always 90% of the time use a flash to light subjects' faces. But here in this portrait that I took, I mean, I'm using flash, two different colors, right? You can get creative and put colored gels on these flashes and really play with those types of tones. And the reason I chose green and pink, you actually can't see because it's cut off at the bottom, is that she's wearing green and pink shoes. So I wanted to play off of that with these two colors that I chose to gel the flashes. And it looks a little retro as well. But again, I'll go over some lighting examples as well. So in this photo here, this is what we call soft light. This was shot in the middle of the afternoon, and you can see the natural fall off of light, where it goes from light to dark on my face. Don't worry about anything else, but just look at the light on my face and how it starts bright here and then falls off subtly to this dark shadow part here, right? It's not a harsh fall off. It's very subtle, you know, on this side of my face versus this side of my face here. And the best time to sort of shoot this type of portrait is during golden hour, which is anywhere between an hour to an hour and a half before sunset, or even an hour before sunrise. So those are some of the two best times to shoot with flattering light, and a lot of your subjects are going to be very evenly lit, and you're going to see nice shadows on their face, and it won't be harsh and unflattering. So you kind of see the lights coming from like back here and lights this side of my face well, but there isn't a harsh fall off, and you can see it's subtle, it's flattering, and it doesn't look unnatural. The next type of light is also natural light, but this is hard light. So you're going to see the hard shadow and the hard lines between the light and dark areas here, right? This is a top-down light in the middle of the day, and that can be intentional depending on the type of story and the type of mood you're showing within your photo, right? This was just for, a clothing brand, a Toronto clothing brand, and it's just a casual e-commerce type shoot. And so, you can see the light coming from the top here, lighting my forehead, but then it harshly falls off to these shadow areas of my face and my neck. And it's not as flattering. It creates these harsh lines, and you can see my eyes aren't well lit. They're in the shadow as well. So if you take a look at a lot of antagonists in movies, they're often lit with this type of lighting setup where their brow is sort of, bold, because there's a lot of contrast between the light that's lighting their forehead and, under their eyes. So this is another type of light. I call this harsh light because of the hard line between the light and dark areas of the face. The last thing I'll go into is flash. And you can get soft flash looks like you saw with the soft light, and you can get harsh flash looks depending on how you use your flash. Oftentimes people will put diffusion, which is like a thin layer of cloth in front of a flash to get that soft light. This is Dr. Mary Pat McAndrews, and you can see here I've used flash to light her face, but it's soft, right? The shadow kind of falls off evenly here. Sure, it's a bit harsh here because of just the way, the shape of space and the way the light hits the face and it falls off, but it's still flattering. It still adds three-dimensionality to her face. And basically the light source is coming from this side here and then lighting her face, creating this even look. And the background's dark because in the hospital it's dark, and sometimes the camera can't see into the shadows like that. So that's why I use the flash to make sure to light her face and bring the viewer's attention to here. I want to highlight Dr. Mary Pat McAndrews because it's a portrait, but I've chosen to by using flash in this way. And what I did was I did have a piece of diffusion on the flash here. So it creates this soft light on her face. So those are three, lighting ways to light portraits, right? You can get creative with the flash, as you saw earlier, where, I can put gels in different colors, but that's up to you to experiment. And there's tons of tutorials on YouTube that can take you through that. The next thing I want to talk about is outfits. Within healthcare, there's really two outfits. You either have suits or scrubs. I like to think of it as, but in research, if we're in labs, it is mandatory if you're photographing in labs to number one, get consent, of course, and B, to be with gloves and a lab coat if you're in the labs at UHN taking those types of photos, right? But this fits the environment. This is Arturo from the Vision Group, Dr. Valerie Wallace's lab. And you can see he's wearing his lab coat as per policy. He's wearing gloves. And that plays to who he is because he is a scientist and he's doing science in a lab. And this is the portrait I took of him as part of the research restart, So this outfit plays to who he is. It would be very awkward if Arturo was wearing a suit, or shorts or something like that, because it wouldn't contribute to who he is. It wouldn't contribute to his story, right? It would tell us that he's a researcher, and it would sort of be a clash being in the space, but the outfit didn't match the space. So I'll give you some other examples as well. So in this one, this is Star from Dr. Mohit Kapoor's lab, and similar to the photo of Arturo, right? Her outfit matches who she is. She is a sequencing specialist. This is the Illumina sequencer, and she's in her lab. So she's got her gloves on, she's got her lab coat on, her mask because we're in 2020. And this outfit plays to who she is, right? She is a scientist and she is in a lab, and it makes sense. If she was in some sort of other outfit, it really wouldn't make sense. It would be a mismatch and her eyes would be like, hold on, that doesn't make sense. In this one, this is Dr. Dean Elterman, and in this photo, the location and the outfit also play a role in the type of photo. I think, and you know, portraiture is subjective. In my opinion, it'd be kind of awkward if he was in scrubs in this location. This is the 5th floor of the Western. There's a nice little bridge with these glass panels here that I think are great in terms of framing your subject and this sort of architectural design that sort of draws your eyes into his face. But, you know, Dr. Elterman, I don't know if he knew that there was a portrait session going on, but he decided to have a suit on, and I think it looks good. And this could be great for, you know, his lab website if he has a lab, or the institution website of the department he's part of. And it tells you who he is, and it's flattering. It looks good. It's in a great location in the hospital, and it makes sense. You know, if he was in scrubs, I wouldn't know, because he's not outside of the OR, or he's not outside of a clinical room or anything like that, or he's not even in clinic. So there would be a mismatch, right? So this is a little more clean cut, corporate, if you will, look, but it matches the environment, it matches that, and it hopefully tells the story of how stylish Dr. Elterman is in this case. I'll give you one more example outside of healthcare. So this is for an active brand for New Balance sneakers, right? And so I'm wearing shorts and an active top and my weight training vest. And it would be weird if I didn't have those things on and I was taking a portrait, you know, for these sneakers, showing that off and showing off an active lifestyle. You know, this plays a role, the outfit, the shorts, they play a role into eventually selling you these sneakers in an ad campaign, right? So if I was wearing long pants or khakis and a t-shirt and these Balances, New Balance shoes, I might be looking like a dad from the Annex or Parkdale. So being in that environment, being in those types of clothes and tying that all together tells a better story about that person, that portrait. So keep that in mind when you're photographing people, their outfits, and the environment that they're going to be in, and how that, you know, plays together with who they are and the type of story you're trying to tell. So the next thing I'll talk about is posing. And this is, I think, the most challenging thing. I think as a photographer for myself, it was hard to sort of wrap my head around, because if you're not working with a model or anything like that, it can be challenging, because you want to make them feel comfortable. And you want to be able to still tell their story and, you know, have fun with it and bring out their personalities. So I've got about 4 tips here for posing, just some, you know, introductory tips that if you've never worked with someone that, or if you work with someone that isn't particularly comfortable in front of the camera, you can use some of these tips to help them and sort of get a better image, if you will. And there's tons of tips on the internet about posing, and you know, it's subjective, because posing can really tell your story and tell who that person is depending on the environment they're in. So, you know, it's subjective and you can have fun with it, but these are some tips that, you know, I'll go over. Turning the shoulder, sort of a 3/4 angle. This is very flattering because it slims the body. You know, it makes it look flattering, as well as it gives it some 3-dimensionality as well. You know, you can see Dr. Haroon here, and it sort of adds, you know, his face is facing me, but his body's that way. It's a little more 3D in a way, and it looks nice, and versus a straight on, which would look very flat and 2-dimensional. Arm positioning. You know, if the arm is sort of pressed up against, you know, if you're doing the sort of 3/4 turn pressed up against the side of your body, it looks a little unnatural and a bit larger than it should be. So separating the arm from the body here, as in this portrait of Dr. Nikki Woods, who's part of Mishner, it makes it look a little more natural, and it doesn't, you know, it doesn't make it look, you know, larger than it should be, or unnatural in that sense. The next thing I'll talk about is sort of shifting your weight. You can have people lean on things, you know, it doesn't have to be a dramatic lean. It can be subtle, like Dr. Gabor Kovacs here. And it looks nice because it adds, again, 3-dimensionality, you know, and for ladies, it can add a bit of curves, and it definitely would look more flattering as well. You know, so play around with that. Have them stand on their back foot or versus their front foot, you know, and that can definitely change the look of how either their silhouette or their torso looks. And think about posing the hair. So the hair is one of the first things that people notice. And yes, you can control that, you know, but don't go touching people's hair. Ask them to move their hair. This is Dr. Stephanie Protze, part of TG Peter Monk. She does heart research. stem cell heart research. And so Heather was on the shoot with me, and I think she might have told her to put her hair on this side at one point, and then on this side, and then on both sides, and it creates a different look, right? And there's no right way to pose hair. It's just a matter of how it looks on a person. And even dudes with long hair, if you've got hair like Dave Grohl, then feel free to play around with that, do what you will. But just know that it's another thing that you can also change and control in terms of body position and things like that. So these are just 4 tips. There are several tips on YouTube videos and tutorials and blogs that you guys can read about after the fact. But these are some basic tips that can immediately start helping you take better portraits or having your portraits look a bit better. The next thing I want to talk about is interacting with your subject. This is key because you want to be able to communicate. You want to communicate the vision that you have for that person that you see, and you want to make sure that they're comfortable with that vision and that's accurate to who they are and representative of who they are, right? Keep it casual. You don't want to get uptight if you're taking a portrait. Yes, if you're maybe new to portraiture as a photographer and your subject is not particularly comfortable, things can get tense and rigid, and you just get these flat facing portraits and they're uninspiring and not fun or not pleasing to look at. So, keeping it casual and communicating are 2 ways to ease the tension, if any, and make someone feel comfortable. Also be positive. Sometimes people haven't ever done this before. So you want to affirm positivity, tell people they're doing great if you're photographing them, and never laugh at anything that you see behind the viewfinder, because that can be very nerve-wracking for anybody. That can be very self-conscious, right? So be positive with your subject. Be positive about your own skills and self, even though maybe if you're new to portraiture or you're just kind of figuring out things, be positive because it'll help the situation as well. And don't be shy to demonstrate. If you have a vision and you're having a hard time explaining it in words, just go out there and show them what you want to try and capture, right? Show them a pose, show them how they want to place their hands and that sort of stuff. And that'll make them more comfortable. And then once they see that, they'll be able to emulate it more accurately and portray that vision. So interacting with your subject is key because it'll help you get the best portrait possible and convey your vision and what you want to show about that person. Quick word about types of portraits. So you have casual portraits, environmental portraits, and group portraits. This is I guess it's a group shot, group portrait. The distinction is a bit blurred, but this is from an arthritis conference. I think they had about, I'm not sure, this looks like about 100 people, but it's great. I know some people's faces can't be seen, but it really shows, everybody as part of this group, and it's a really great group portraits, I think. So the casual portrait is basically, they're not directly looking into the camera. It's a little more about those moments in between taking, say, a professional straight on headshot versus something fun like this. This couple they're interacting with each other, but it's a nice portrait because it looks so natural. They're laughing. He probably told a joke. I don't remember, but it's fun. It's playful. It's a little more authentic and genuine, right? The casual portrait. And it tells that story about who they are as a couple. The next thing is the environmental portrait. So a lot of the lab shots and the UHN research shots are going to be environmental portraits. And I think those are the best types of portraits for those best types of portraits, because it puts that person in a place, right? And that place is part of who they are and it defines them a little bit, right? So you can see here the lab equipment, the pipettes, the lab coats and the lab space itself. And I've placed this person in that environment, and it tells a little bit about who she is, right? She's a researcher, and she does science, and that's part of her identity, and that's what you want to capture with these environmental portraits. The group portraits, they can be a bit challenging just because you kind of have to get imaginative, and you have to really, bring out everyone's personality. And like I said, the lines are a bit blurred and it can be challenging because what's the difference between a group portrait and a group shot? But you have to use your imagination and, find a way to relate the group to the environment. In this case, this is Dr. Reed's lab, and they're drawing some fun chemical structures on here, and they're all chemists, right? So this relates to who they are as people, and very interested in what Dr. Mark Reed is talking about or drawing here. So you can get creative. And you're going to find in UHN research or even in healthcare, we all work as a team. So you're going to find that more and more of the photos you take are going to be of groups and who they are, whether they be interacting with their workspace or whether they be, as a team for, just a nice group shot, right? So the group portrait and the environmental portrait are definitely two types of portraits I find at UHN you'll probably be taking more of should you choose to be taking portraits. So here's a quick summary. So in essence, plan your portrait, figure out who you're photographing, what they do, how you're going to do it, where you're going to do it. All those factors and things play into the story you're telling. Understand location, composition, and how different composition can tell different things about a person. Your lighting, whether you choose to use flash or natural light. I find if you just got a cell phone, natural light is probably going to be your best bet, and finding good natural light, big giant windows, and soft light, whether shooting at golden hour. Flash on cell phones aren't very flattering because you can't really control the direction. Look at how outfits and the location play together to tell that story, and think about those posing tips to get a little more dynamic and 3D sort of looking portrait. And last thing is, portraits are subjective, right? You can get as creative as you want. You can add props, you can use different lighting, you can be casual, get creative with it, and don't forget to interact and engage with your subject to make sure that they're comfortable. And then the last thing is, I'll leave you with some portrait photographers, and these are some of my inspirations when I first got into photography. And I'll just talk a little, very briefly about each one of them. Cecil Beaton is a great portrait photographer. He photographed the royal family back in the day, as well as I think he worked for Vanity Fair, a great portrait photographer from England. Annie Leibovitz, I think most people have heard of her, photographs celebrities. She's sort of known for her very intimate portraits of people, and once again, great portrait photographer. Diane Arbus, she photographed a lot of LGBTQ communities and marginalized communities in her time, and her portraits are very, can be very provocative, but very thought-provoking as well, and very interesting to see some of the communities that she photographed. And she's also a big environmental portrait, so a lot of people placed in certain environments as well. Dorothea Lange is a photographer from the Great Depression. You can see this giant box. It is a camera, but she photographed farm families being displaced because of the Great Depression and how people had to move throughout the US and things like that. So there's a lot of cool farm portraits and farm-related portraiture from Dorothea Lange. Richard Avedon is a huge photographer. He worked for Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, fashion, that stuff. Really, really interesting to look at some of his portraits and how he photographs some celebrities and things like that. The last one's Vivian Mayer, and I call her the selfie queen because her and her little Rolleiflex camera here, she took a ton of selfies, but they were so creative in anything that any of us could ever do with our cell phones, I think. But she also did take some very cool street portraits as well. And a lot of these photographers are film photographers, and that's sort of my inspiration because they really focus more so on the composition of the shot, the vision, and how they place their subject in their environment. So feel free to look up any of these people afterwards, look up some of their works, and maybe you're in an Indigo and you find one of their books, take a look at some of their photographs that they've taken. So I really hope that this presentation gave you some sense of an idea to help you develop a vision for taking portraits, to see your subject in a different light, and to help you place your subject in certain environments that helps you tell their story. So that's it for me, and I'm really happy to answer any questions about any of the portraits or anything like that. So feel free to ask away.
Thank you, Twain. I think that was a very fun session that we had. It kind of mixes a little bit of work and also our personal interests. So thank you very much for another exciting session again. So we do have a couple of questions in the group chat. If anybody also has any questions, feel free to add it in to the group chat, and then Twain can address them live here today. So the first question is actually from Heather. Are there certain go-to portrait poses that make everyone look good?
Yes.
For beginners?
For beginners, I think so. So this one here of Nigel, the 3/4, arms crossed, serious, it looks good. It's simple, it's casual, it's easy to do. Even these leaning shots here against a rail and head on, they're still turd. I find these are most flattering. This one is the most flattering just because it slims the figure and it makes you look a little more 3D. And it's simple, it's casual, it's easy to execute, and you can do that without flash. You can do that in natural light, and it's pretty straightforward. And anybody can direct anyone to turn their bodies and turn their head and stuff like that. It's not too complicated to execute.
I have an extension to this question,
Sure.
though.
Sure.
So I often hear about the crossing of the arms as the power pose.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how do you find a balance then? Because you use this example of Nigel as an example, but I see that he's got the quote power pose.
Yeah.
Is it really a power pose, or if it is, how can we soften it?
Yes, so it is a power pose. I often see a lot of portraits, and I'm guilty of this too, where people cross their arms and they smile. When you think about crossing your arms, you think of something that's stern and authoritative, right? Or authoritative, sorry. To soften it, you could do something like Gabor, what he's doing here, have his arms, kind of just, leaning against this, or the one of Dean Elterman. Where's Dean? Give me one sec. I will pull this up. So the photo of Dean here, you can have a hand in the pocket. This looks a lot more softer. The hand's a little more natural by his side here. And it's not necessarily a power pose, right? But the way that I'm shooting, because I'm shooting upwards, it sort of gives that authoritative look, right? Because, you're looking up to this person from your point of view as the photographer, but it's softer than if I were to have his hands crossed. Now, if I wanted something super authoritative, I would have asked him to cross his hands, and then now he just looks like, he's the head of his department. He might be, I don't know, I'm just saying that. But this is something that you can do to definitely soften that power pose if that's something you don't want to display or show.
Okay, perfect. Another question that we have is from Michael Reber.
Mm-hmm.
Are there rules related to picture temperature? So, for example, blue versus yellow for portraits?
Yeah.
And what about color versus black and white? None of the photos you showed from UHN were in black and white. What are your thoughts on that?
That's okay. So I'll address the color temperature. So with color temperature, you want the skin to look as natural as possible, right? So if you look at the color wheel, the skin sort of lies in the orange-red zone. And here in most of the portraits, that's where the skin tones lie. The overall color temperature of the image, you want to adjust it so that this doesn't look too pink, it doesn't look too green, it doesn't look too blue, or it doesn't look too yellow. So in all these portraits here, you can see it looks natural. It's not too orange or too yellow. It's their natural skin tone. And you want to adjust the color temperature so that the skin tone lands on these natural color ranges within sort of the red-orange range of colors. In terms of black and white versus color, I think it's an artistic choice. I think black and white, it allows you to really analyze what light is doing to your portrait. And how the shadows and highlights are falling on the face, and how the contrast in shades of gray tell the story on a person's face. Color is definitive, right? You know that, Mary Pat is wearing a blue top, and, the background is, a bit blue toned and things like that. I think it's more of an artistic choice. I think black and white portraits, in my opinion, this is, like I said, it's subjective. Portraits are subjective. In my opinion, tend to be a little more, I don't know what the word is, but it's a little more, I guess, I don't want to say moody, but it's a little more, it's a little more, I don't know. I have a loss. I know what I want to say, but it's hard to put it into the right words. But like I said, it's an artistic choice, and I think between color and black and white and depending on the types of poses, can really make something a bit more emotional, and it forces you more to see into that person, and it's almost like looking into someone's soul. I think, at least, that's my sort of subjective take on it.
I also have a question myself.
Mhm.
This is something that I'm curious in or I struggle with. So when I'm trying to take a picture, I know that if you're, depending on the lighting, like
Mhm.
I may actually want a particular background, but the sun is not
Yes.
working in my favor. So then in my picture, I end up just seeing my silhouette. You don't
Yeah.
even see my face in that picture.
Yeah.
Other than changing the direction, because then that means it's a different background and a background that I
Mhm.
may not want. What can I do to actually see the person?
Flash. So that's, that's where you want to use your cell phone flash if you're taking it with your cell phone, because the situation you described is called a backlit situation. And backlighting is actually nice because it creates, I can find, is there a photo here that I have of anything backlit? So actually, so here, this couple right here is backlit. The sun's coming from behind and it's lighting. You can see it's creating that rim of light around their heads. Um, so what I did with this, I had a reflector here that reflected the light, and that's me because I this is a professional photo and it's a professional shoot. But if you just have your cell phone, you can use the flash to fill in those shadows and control and take the harshness out of that silhouette. If you've raised the exposure or the light levels on this person, then you might not get the detail of the background because that would be too bright. But I think if you're using a cell phone and you want to experiment with it, definitely throw the flash on and see what happens because with that rim light, you can see how it creates that outline and separates them a little bit more from the background. And maybe that could work for some of your portraits as well if you have a nice background like that and can create that separation with just a little bit of flash. Filling in their faces.
I'll definitely try that. Although I think it'll also depend on the phone itself and how well the
Yeah,
camera is.
yeah. It
Yeah.
depends on the image processing. Camera cell phones, cell phone cameras are getting better and better, and you can take great photos. So don't be afraid to experiment with your cell phone. And most people are still at home. You've got your kids, you've got your partners, you've got other family members that you may be cohabitating with, and if they're comfortable, practice with them.
Okay, I have another question, a little bit unrelated to specifically portraits,
Mhm.
but since now that you've got my head thinking about this, so I know that as we're buying new cell phones and new cameras, oh,
Yeah,
the megapixels, that
yeah.
number just keeps going up. But then at the same time, when I'm shopping for a camera, someone says to me, well, up after beyond a certain megapixel, it doesn't matter anyway. So,
Yeah.
don't pay
Great
for those
question.
extra megapixels. What is your thought on that?
Great question. I'm glad you asked that. Megapixels is just a marketing thing, in my opinion. To the uninformed, it might seem something great, but to someone who knows their way around cameras and camera technology, they understand that higher megapixels are useful in very niche situations. If you're a commercial photographer and you're photographing products that are going to be blown up or going to be used in magazines for print, you're going to need those high megapixels count because with increase in megapixel equals increase in resolution. You're going to need those higher resolutions for print to see fine details about your product and to really manipulate your image in post, whether it be photoshopping, designing, or even cropping, right? Because it gives you that room to play with and allows you to, crop to with print standards and things like that. So beyond a certain point for the average consumer is no point. I think the sweet spot, in my opinion, for like a enthusiast camera or a prosumer camera would be 16 to 24 megapixels. That's all you really need. I've shot weddings on a 16 megapixel camera and those images look great. There is a phone out right now, I think that has a 102 megapixel sensor, and those images don't look nearly as good as something compared to the camera I shoot with at Krembil, which is 24 megapixels, right? So in my opinion, it's simply marketing for certain companies, and they really do grab the uninformed audience on that. And you can get away with anywhere from 16 to 24, and you'll get great images and sharp images that you can print, your for your photo albums and even share online. And keep in mind, the larger the megapixel count, the higher the resolution, the bigger the file size. So you're gonna have to figure out storage solutions for those high megapixels photos as well. So just a quick take on that.
Very good point. We have another question that just popped up from Karen.
Yeah.
So Dr. Davis wants to know, or she comments that I find that the DOF is weird on my Android phone. So that sometimes a hand looks way too big and distorted. Do you have any tips? And perhaps maybe you can let us know what DOF stands for first, because I don't know.
I think, Dr. Davis, I think what you're talking about is depth of field, which is different from perspective distortion, is what you're describing with the hand. So depth of field is how sort of shallow and blurred out your background gets. If you look at this portrait here in the center, you can see that the background's sort of blurred out versus this one where it's not so much. So we call this a shallow depth of field, and the focus is entirely on the subject here versus this one's, I guess, a deeper depth of field where you can see all of them in focus. The distortion you're talking about is a property of the lens. So the wider the lens, meaning the lower the, I guess, the focal length, so like say 24 millimeter versus 50 millimeter, depending on where you place certain parts of your subject, it will get distorted. So the wider, so 24 millimeters, if you place something on the edge of the frame, you're going to see that distortion because the edges of those wide angle lenses are going to distort your subject. A way to work around that is to center your subject in the is to place your subject in the center. The distortion is least in the center when it comes to those wide angle lenses, or any lens for that matter that has distortions, and you'll get a less exaggerated sort of view of anything that you place in the center of the frame.
Okay, hopefully that was helpful. Karen also has a follow-up comment. I think I'm in a similar boat. I gave up my film good camera years ago. I never bought a digital SLR because I got hooked on the handiness of a small phone or other small point and shoot. But now I want to go back to something with good control, yet not big and heavy, and lots of lenses to carry around. Do you have any advice about a compromise?
Yeah, there's a lot of we call them crop sensor cameras. So crop sensor cameras are great. Crop sensor mirrorless cameras are really portable, like the Sony A6000 series. They're really portable. They can fit in your pocket, and they have great quality, and they have great features. They also come with zoom lenses that you can attach on if you don't want to carry multiple lenses. You talk about film cameras. You could get a film camera for less than $100 with a 50 millimeter lens and practice with that. Yes, you have to go get your film developed, but I think that's the best way to learn photography. And, you know, even though I was born after the film, well, I was born, like, I guess, in the film age, you know, in the 90s, but into the early 2000s when I sort of looked into getting into photography and, you know, what my parents were using, they all had film cameras, and I didn't care to learn with it back then because I wasn't as interested. But, you know, in the early 2010s, I loved using film cameras, and I still use them today because it's a great tool to really practice composition, your understanding of light. And the nice thing is you don't get to see your image and obsess over it and what's wrong with it. You kind of have to do that after the fact and really learn from each image that you take. So if you want, I would say go back to film versus anything else because it's the cheapest. But if you're looking at compact cameras, look at mirrorless APS-C type cameras, which are easy to carry around.
Okay, and so since we're talking about film cameras, would you be able to tell Heidi where there might be local places that still develop film?
Downtown Camera, I'm not sponsored by them, but you think I would because I spend so much time there. Downtown Camera is at Queen and Church. It's right beside Henry's. So they do wonderful film development. You can, you know, print your photos as well as get them developed. They'll scan it. They'll send you a Dropbox link with everything. And they have a great selection of used equipment. So you probably find you know, some gems there if you spend some time with some of the sales reps. But and they're fairly inexpensive. I think you could walk out of there, you know, spending less than $150, get a couple rolls of film and a film camera, and you'd be good to shoot. So Downtown Camera at Queen and Church.
Perfect. It sounds like that rings a bell to Heidi.
Yeah.
So I don't see any other questions in the group chat here. I do see a comment from Samra. She's thanked you and says that it's an excellent presentation. I'd have to agree.
Thank you.
So this is probably one of the presentations that I'll be going back to refer to once we upload this and share this with the community as I practice and look at your cheat sheet. So, you know, before we end for the day, I'm very happy to be back to run the draw for the Krembil mug. I don't have my helper here today because she's in a virtual camp right now. So she's at another computer. So it'll be just me and my handy little box and names. So I have been looking at our participants list today and I've added everybody's name. So right now I'm going to pull up a name. And I'm going to show you right away. Oh, so I don't know. So this is MH. So I only received the initials off of this person's Zoom account. So MH. If you are watching this as a replay, please get in contact with either Heather Sherman, heather.sherman@uhn.ca, or in touch with our Krembil admin office, krembil@uhnresearch.ca, or if anybody who is still on the line knows who MH is, let him or her know to contact us. And I'm going to now send it over to Heather.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Twain. Great presentation. I'm also going to be rewatching it for some tips. Really excellent stuff today. So that was, and I think it's great. You know, people always want to know how to be more creative with their photography, so it was perfect. We have a couple great sessions coming up to the end of July. Next week, we'll be talking about promoting your research paper. And that's going to focus more on sort of the public affairs side of things, how we can help you promote your research paper. So a little bit more on sort of the media, social media side. The following week, we'll be talking about the art of the media interview. So that'll be sort of like media training 101 and little tips and tricks to help you, not if, but when you get that asked to appear in the media. And then on July 31st, Twain is going to be talking about design hacks for your scientific presentation. So just want to thank everybody again for coming out to these sessions. We really enjoy presenting them for you, and have a safe and happy and healthy weekend, and we'll see you next Friday. Bye.